Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third W12 Plus exchange and our last one for the series, Leveraging Climate Adaptation for the Water, Energy, Food Nexus. My name is Judy Jane. I am the Communications Associate with W12 Plus, and I'm here to get our exchange started. W12 Plus is a movement of motivated organizations that connects, catalyze, and incubate urban water solutions. W12 Plus is jointly run by the Institute for Ecological Civilization based in the US and SOS, a nonprofit based in South Africa. Today's panel is part of the W12 Plus Exchange, a series of conversations to help transform research, experiences, lessons learned, and more into new actions and insights for each of you today. Climate change threatens water, energy, and food separately. Together, their intersections are described as the water, energy, food, or WEF Nexus. The WEF Nexus is an integrated approach recognizing that by 2050, humans will need to grow more food than ever before in human history, and that means changing how we currently manage our water, energy, and food systems. There are, of course, many existing programs, technologies, and policies today working on adapting our daily lives in the face of climate change. There are apps for reducing food waste and national climate planning tools for assessing a country's water resiliency and baseline, helping to turn climate commitments into effective and fundable programs of work. Our panelists today will share their experiences and their thoughts on our core question: what is a key lever for climate adaptation within the water, energy, food nexus, and why? We hope you come away from today's panel with new insights and ideas for your own work and join us in answering the core question via the chat or the Q&A form using the Google link. Our exchanges are designed for a more informal conversational tone, so please do use the chat or Google form link to join the conversation. Our panelists for today are Dr. Karine Cash, Mohamed Abelrous, and Chetan Mistry. Dr. Karine Cash works as an assistant professor in planning and community climate adaptation at Mount Allison University in Canada. In 2018, she co-edited a book entitled Water, Energy, Food, and People Across the Global South, The Nexus in an Era of Climate Change. Mohamed Abelrous is the founder and chairman of Life from Water, an international nonprofit delivering clean water and agricultural solutions to underserved communities in Egypt, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. Life from Water develops and installs specific water treatment units and filters to purify groundwater. And last but not least, Chetan Mistry is a strategy and marketing manager at Xylem South Africa, and also works on partner model and engagement. His work on corporate social responsibility, CSR, provides support and strategic considerations to Xylem's CSR program, Watermark. To our three panelists, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and getting our conversation started. I'll make one more reminder for our Q&A answer period today. Please click on the Google form link in the chat to submit your questions. You can also find us on social media at W12_programs. I will now pass the microphone to our moderators for today. Please welcome a new face on the W12 Plus team, Dakota Splichalova, the W12 Plus Assistant Project Manager, and W12 Plus Projects Director, Ellie Levy. Thank you all.
Thanks, Judy, and thank you to all of our participants and panelists today. Really excited to be here for this conversation. It's a new topic or a kind of shift in our exchanges where we're adding a nexus approach to one of the topics rather than diving deeper into a specific topic within the water sector specifically. So this will be really interesting for all of us. I'm excited to learn from everybody today. As Judy mentioned, the structure of these exchanges is really conversational. So we have invited our panelists to respond to one particular question, which Dakota will be posing shortly, and then to engage with each other and ask questions and really think through kind of the responses and the ideas behind that. And we'll just see where the conversation goes. As Judy also mentioned, please engage with us and add comments in the Google. We have team members watching the YouTube chat comments and the Google form. So submit questions, tweet at us, whatever works best for you, and we will integrate them into the session as best we can. So yeah, with that, I think we're just going to jump right into it, and I will pass it over to my wonderful new colleague, Dakota Shpikalova, and she will be setting us up for our core question today. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ellie. Good morning to everybody, or afternoon, wherever you are. So you set me up very well. So our core question for today is, what is the key lever for climate adaptation within the water, energy, food nexus, and why? And so we're going to go to Corinne now to respond.
Thank you, Dakota. I just, when Ellie was speaking just now, I decided to kind of shift my answer slightly. I think that part of the problem is that in many ways we have been trained to think in silos. We've trained to be experts in one particular area. So I am the agricultural expert, I am the water expert, I am the engineer, and you know, I graduated from a school of planning, and the planning discipline, really, we have to work with a wide variety of specialists and community. And I think coming out of that background, I really have I understand the importance of understanding how integrated systems are. And I think that an important lever is to educate upcoming students and really decision makers to think from a complex systems perspective. So really understanding how decision making, especially in this integrated world that we live in, there are ripple effects, and even within, you know, local governments, very often the engineers don't talk to the planners, and they don't talk to who the people that are holding the money. So I just I think that there needs to be more communication and an integrated approach within these decision-making processes. Second thing is regarding the work that I've done in the Global South. Very often communities, people within communities, and, you know, even in the work that I've done up north in the Canadian Arctic, in Indigenous communities, people have expertise, people have Indigenous knowledge, and there are experts within communities, but they don't have the resources to do what needs to be done in order to have optimum results. And so, you know, the climate crisis right now, $100 billion per year was promised in Copenhagen for climate mitigation and adaptation. And as of 2018, it was 78.9 billion had actually been transferred. And if you break that money down, unfortunately, it's the Global South is definitely getting the short end of the straw. So I think that an important point is, you know, the climate finance, the global north that has caused the problem, really has to step up and deliver climate finance for adaptation. Most of the funding's gone towards mitigation, but something like the WEF brings mitigation and adaptation together, right? So they really need to, the global north needs to stand up and deliver on what has been promised and what ethically should be delivered, given that you know, it's supposed to be above and beyond development aid and humanitarian aid, and that's not exactly what's happening. It's all being integrated into one, and so these are big problems within climate negotiations. So I think that those, you know, I could go on, but I think I'll stop there. Number one, complex systems thinking. I think that we all need to understand the complexity of issues and solutions. And the second thing would be that the global north needs to step up and do the right thing and start transferring, making good on their promises. And more money should be invested into adaptation. So I'll leave it at that.
So thank you, Karen, for that. If I can ask you a question, this is very important for me, getting coming from on-ground background, working with different nonprofits, and a very important challenge that we face is that you mentioned that the experts in the academic part, they are expert in silos, in specific actor, but when nonprofits are very general with no that core expertise. So how do you think that we can leverage the expertise of the academic part into nonprofits so that they implement this in what they do?
I think that increasingly there are academics who are pracademics. So, people that kind of are gappers between practice and academia. That's where I see myself fitting in. And there are more people who are working in academia who like to get their hands dirty. And so I would say, people in nonprofit could, I think that there are ways of finding each other, avenues like this, for example. So I think that's reach out to universities, reach out to people in various departments. I know I'm always very interested when a nonprofit contacts me to work on various projects, because it makes me better as an educator, as a thinker. And so I don't really have much more of an answer for you other than that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Corinne. And from my perspective, and I do appreciate your systems thinking dynamic that you have in place. And I think we also kind of buy into that type of thinking. It's really not the isolation that needs to be there. We're all connected. And I like the word that you call ripple effect about decision makers. And this is highly critical because, actions in one place will affect others. But the challenge then becomes, you got each of the custodians, stakeholders in various environments that has their own objectives that they want to meet. So how do we then unify all the different stakeholders and trying to bring them together so that we have those common objectives? I think that's probably the biggest challenge that we face across all the communities that we work with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I worked on, I did my master's on Stellenbosch municipality in South Africa. And at that time, the planners had their own plans and objectives, and the engineers had their own plans, and the planners were expanding in one direction while the engineers were expanding in another direction. So the development and the pipes in the ground were completely disintegrated. And you know what they started to do? They started, every time a big development proposal would come through, it would go to a committee of various individuals from the different departments, and they would discuss whether it's feasible and if it lined up with the plan. It's been a while since I've talked to anyone to find out if they're still doing that and how effective it is. But I think that that's one approach. And I think this is the importance of having community meetings and meetings with all the key stakeholders. I think that communication is so critical, and it's something that continues. We need to continue to teach. Even in universities, when I'm teaching students in environment and in planning, very often students don't want to do group work, right? So the young people who are taking the courses, they don't want to do group work. And I'm saying, well, this is going to be your life. If you want to work in this area, you have to be able to sit down and talk to people and have difficult conversations and work through some difficult, challenging topics, right? So I think that we can't shy away from difficult topics. And I think that we have to continue to, and also be a bit humble, reach out to other people who have expertise. We don't know everything, and just be professionally humble to say, I want to learn from you. I want to make this project better. How can we work together as a team? And it is like a soccer team or a football team. You have to work together in order to make a play happen. So that's what I think.
That's quite an interesting conversation you're actually getting. I mean, you spoke on something about, you know, the new generations coming, and there's an element of how they might work in these environments, which is quite an interesting topic on its own, because obviously new people think so differently. But my follow-up question to that would be something around the rate at which we might be doing this. I mean, I don't know, in your view, there might be conversations happening, there might be some touch points happening. Do you think the pace is quick enough, especially if you're considering statistically, you look at the demand for electricity, demand for water, demand for food is growing really exponentially. So are we quick enough to actually adapt to the changing world that we're living in?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we needed to do everything, you know, yesterday. We needed to move, and sometimes I think that we're unfortunate. I like to be an optimist, but I think that the realities of the world are sometimes putting us backwards. I think that the global political economy, various events that are happening in the world are shifting the conversation right now. You know, we have the war in the Ukraine, and that's shifting resources. So funding that was going to climate adaptation and mitigation and all of these issues. Now governments are spending them on security, and then we have different governments that are just they're not stepping up, and they're making promises at the global level, and then in their own backyards they're not meshing their own actions and decision making with their commitments that they make at the global meetings. So no, I don't think that we're moving fast enough, and I'm concerned about that. But we just have to keep moving forward, I guess.
Thanks, you all. That was great. And I think I mean, there's a lot that we could unpack there. And instead of actually responding now, I think what we can do is just pass the core question on to our next panelist, Mohamed, and see have your take on this topic. So the core question again is, what is a key lever for climate adaptation within the water, energy, food nexus, and why? Over to you, Mohamed.
Thank you. So yes, talking about this, I will talk from my background working in the field in different local communities. So as Karen said, big part of that is the policymakers and the decision making globally and fulfilling their promises. But the challenge that we face at the end, because now we are on the ground, our area of expertise is now what we can do with our area of influence at the end of the day. So the way I see it is the climate change I'm working in Northern Africa, for example, in a place called Mandera, between Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. So that place is a visible extreme case for climate change, where the area is very dry, there is no water, no underground water. They depend on rainwater, and rainwater now is becoming less and less. So this is an extreme case. Yet we see that nonprofits and international organization and the government, they focus only on the aid and relief. So year after year in the dry season, water trucks come there, food bags, and so on. So, but no practical long-term solution in that. So there is some resources from international nonprofits and governments that can be used when adopting the Nexus point of view, but in state of this, they do it in unsustainable way, which is very expensive, sending water trucks to different communities. And I have many stories that I can share with challenges that we face serving these communities. So what I think that can help in that adaptation and the WEF Nexus is the nonprofits and the private sectors work players in these communities. One point is the collaboration. So as Karen said, as a nonprofit, as Life from Water, we are a specialized nonprofit in water, which is just water, not food, not energy. So for many years, we praised ourselves that we are a technical implementer. So we usually work with other nonprofits implementing their water solution. But after some years we found that this is not enough, because if you think just from water point of view, and we have many cases where we implemented a project, a water project, and after 1 year, oh, we need to do agriculture. We didn't thought of that. Oh, we need energy. So there's a lot of waste in the resources, and the challenge with nonprofit that they have limited resources. Even if they are an international organization, they have limited resources to certain projects, and so, which is a very important part. So how I see it is the nonprofits collaborating together. So I am specialized in water. There's another organization specialized in energy, another one in agriculture, or even as Life from Water. What we did, we started partnering with private sector, with private experts, to get from their expertise. Okay, guys, we are the specialized in water, but how we can think of that specific project for the next 3 or 4 years? What are the needs in the food part, in the energy part, and so even if we don't have the resources, even if it's not in the plan, but we need to account for that from now, in order, because at the end this will make the project much more sustainable and much more cost efficient, and the impact for each dollar paid will be much more. So yes, and the last point is the local communities, because now we are talking about the water, energy, food nexus, and the climate change, but the local communities, they don't care about this. They care about, I need water now, I need this now. So a big challenge that I believe all the nonprofits are facing, what's in it for them, the people in the rural communities, how that important topic will be translated to their daily life, because in many cases, water compete with food or with energy. In some places in northern Kenya, we implemented a 10,000 cubic meter water ban, yet, and we have the plan to use that water in drinking and agriculture. Yet the community, they didn't want to use this in agriculture. We are okay with that. We just need it for water, for drinking, and this is their priority. So I can't just come and say, no, guys, you need to do this. No, but it needs to come from them. And there is a lot of capacity building and working on the ground to make that happen. That's it.
So I guess I will ask you a question. So what do you think some of the barriers are to creating those multidisciplinary teams that you're referring to?
Yeah, one of the barriers that many nonprofits adopt, if I can say, a competitive approach, not a collaborative or cooperative approach. So we are, at the end of the day, you are competing on the donation of the donors. So if you think of the development work from that point of view, there is a lot of barriers. But if you think from the other side, that you are cooperating together, and by that cooperation, we will leverage our resources so that the impact will be higher, the cost will be less, and we will exchange the expertise. And when we implement that on the ground with different nonprofits, there is a huge accumulated experience in that nexus, project after project. But coming from that barrier, just removing that barrier by having open communication with different parties, I think this is the first important part.
Mohamed, also from the perspective of the reliance on NGOs, sometimes we see, and I hope I don't position this in the wrong way, but sometimes we see NGOs looked at as a band-aid approach to many of our solutions that we have. Let's put the NGOs in front, look at a community, solve a water problem, solve an energy problem, etc. That's right at the bottom end. Do you think NGOs can play more of a strategic role, more root cause analysis of tackling communities where we can start looking at it from a systems point of view, as we saw from the previous conversation?
Yes, pretty much so. In many cases, I see nonprofits as the intermediate between the private sector and the local communities, which is very important to have a sustainable overall impact at the end, which is the goal for the three parties, for profits and nonprofits and local communities. But nonprofits are not thinking from that systematic, professional, for-profit thinking that the private sector is doing, which is very important, even if I am nonprofit, in my point of view. So having a three-party partnership between the different levels will make it work. At the end of the day, will make the projects of the nonprofits sustainable. And I think there's an equation, and when equation from having the three parties working together so that we have a sustainable impact for that fit the priority of each party of these parties.
Absolutely.
It sounds so simple, doesn't it? I mean, the things that we're talking about, it's not rocket science. It's about collaborating. It's about people skills. And I'm just wondering whether or not we are somehow, you know, lacking those kinds of human communication skills, those not so soft skills, because there are these barriers to, you know, we know that collaborating is important. We understand that everything is connected, but yet there is still this competition, as you say, between various, even disciplines, I think, that can come in the way.
Yeah, it's much easier said than done. So saying that's very easy, but working in we are working in a place called Wajir in northern Kenya, and when we started going there, we found so the water is they have less amount of underground water, and what we can do is doing solar powered wells there. So when we scouted, we found that at each village there is more than 5 to 10 different shallow wells that are not functioning, and each one is made from a separate international or national nonprofit. So when a new nonprofit comes, instead of working on the previous one, they do another one, and they do the same mistake by not following up and engaging the community. And so, and when a third nonprofit go there, talking with the community doesn't care about the first two, and then they do a third one. So when we went there, we visit all the wells, we got from the signboards all the name of all the organization, and we sent all of them. Okay, guys, we're working now. We want to collaborate together. We didn't get any reply yet. We told the community we will not do new project yet. We can do innovation on the existing project to save costs and having more impact. And we asked them why you have all these failures. They told us because there is no technical expertise in the local community. So when the pump has any technical issue, that's it. So we thought, okay, we can, instead of doing new one, we can renovate, saving much cost, and then we can invest in the capacity building to the community to have some technician do this, and that's it. So it's not rocket science, but a lot of communication need to be done.
As a last question, Mohammed, you know, do you think the levers are slightly different? Especially, it sounds like you work a lot with the rural communities, and we're seeing again the dynamics that are taking place, high urbanization. We're seeing a lot of rural communities now moving into urban environments, and the perception then changes. These nexuses, people understanding of these connecting points change. Do you think these levers would be different? Do you think there's something that we need to do, bring rural versus urban communities a bit closer together from an understanding, as well as playing an influential role between the two?
Yes, of course, and this is the key at the end for the impact. So we work with different rural communities. We found some of them very closed communities, and for example, working with people in indigenous communities in Canada, for example. So some communities are somehow closed, and they will not pretty much accept the intervention. But in some other communities, you can find them very well educated, not in an academic part with the Nexus, but they understand that in order to plan for agriculture, we need to plan for water. We have a limited amount of water. How are you going to use this? So in a way or another, they are in many communities. For example, we have a project in Nakuru in Kenya, and they started saying, okay, we have an orphanage with many orphans, and they need to have cost-efficient food in order to grow. And they found we have limited resources, we have land. So why not planning to have a borehole? With that borehole, we can have our own food. We can sell the excess water to the other communities. So there is an evolution in some rural communities, but I think the key point for that is whether there is a lot of communication with the external parties, the non-profits, and so. But in the extreme areas, like the border areas, they don't have these priorities. Their needs are pretty much more basic. So you will need a lot of investment, a lot of time working on the ground with them, not from not from my country. I need to be there on the ground, living with them, so that I can transfer that with their culture, with their thinking, and get the solution implemented together.
A great comment.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you all for responding. Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you for your questions, Chetan and Kareem. I think we're going to move forward now with Chetan's response. As so far, we've heard about systems thinking, communication has been key, and collaboration. So the core question again for Chetan is, what is a key lever for climate adaptation within the water, energy, food nexus, and why?
Great stuff. Thanks a lot, Dakota, for that. So I've got a similar theme as part of my thinking, and I think it's an important theme that has to be part of our conversation. And it's also around the systems thinking, because each of the areas are completely independent, and we're talking about upstream and downstream as well. So it's important to understand things like the dependency of water for the production of power, the need for power to move water, etc., and that power and water combination and the need for that to actually produce the goods under the current circumstances that we are. So think about the tractors that we're using, the water to get it to site, all these kind of discussions are all interconnected. So it's highly critical that we look at it from that full systems approach. But the challenge does come about that there are various stakeholders across all of this. So it's a matter about keeping some accountability through all the stakeholders to have a unified understanding of our responsibility around the resources that we have. And that across this entire value chain, again, from upstream right to downstream, that we look at it holistically and we maintain the responsibilities that we have. And the custodians within those are holding people accountable for these requirements so that we can protect the resources that we have. On another element, I also see the dynamics of how our communities have to adapt. And this adaptation for me is the combination. We've been very reliant over the years on centralized system in urban environments, and then you have your rural context that's there. So we need to have a combination of both hybrid systems of centralized and decentralized systems, and understanding again of all the different components within the systems to work in an efficient, sustainable way. And in a way that also looks at it from a reuse perspective, that we can bring everything back, it's sustained, it's kept within an ecosystem, so to speak, and that communities then can be self-sustaining in that way as well. And this will allow for more resiliencies for communities to be able to adjust to calamities that might strike due to various circumstances that we have. So I think that's the approach that I would take for understanding this nexus and trying to make sure that we can ensure that all the points are taken care of in a very effective manner.
So what unique role do you think the private sector has to play in this?
So the private sector has to play an absolute key role in this. And I think one of the drivers, and that's why one of my questions earlier is, what's the motivation? Where does the objective sit? So you have an objective, if we take it from the NGO perspective, and Mohammed, you kind of outlined really key, some wonderful ways of making sure communities' needs are taken care of. They don't have water. How do we close that need? If you look at it from a commercial private sector point of view, companies are there to make money, and strangely enough, this is what ends up happening. People will make a buck in whichever way they feel they need to make a buck. Whether it affects somebody down the road, it may or may not matter. And that's why I brought the element of responsibility into the conversation here. And this is critical because it's important for these custodians, the private sector, to also understand that they have a responsibility to play. So if they are pumping, let's say, contaminated water or abusing energy, etc., then it has an impact directly on other communities. It means those resources that they are consuming, that they are making more scarce, has an impact on other communities downstream. And so it's important that they actually have a responsible role to play. But we know that that's a challenge, because as soon as you have an objective of money for private sector, then people try to bend the rules as much as they can. And this is where policy making becomes really critical, because and not only having the right policies, but enforcing the right policies to make sure that everybody stays in line, everybody plays their role, and everybody then is held accountable.
Great answer. Thank you.
So Shaitan, if I can ask you another question, you mentioned the decentralized solution and how this is very important to have self-sufficient communities. And in the nonprofit sector, this is the biggest challenge that we have in the communities we are working in. So what do you think? What is the best model to have a self-sufficient community putting the Nexus in the background?
Yeah, so, you know, I mean, I look at some things, sometimes I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I look back, you know, centuries ago at my ancestors and how did they live their life. And their lifestyle was very different. They had a piece of land, they'd have a cow, a bull plowing their land, they'd throw some seeds into the ground, and the bull's dung would fertilize the ground. So it was a very close system in that way. But community has changed, where you have a global community now. You might have rural context, but they're being impacted by the global community. So we've got to think a little bit differently for these communities to create self-sustaining units, if I can call that. So it's about them understanding that they also have limitations on the resources that they might have. So access to a point of water, access to energy, etc. And the only way to increase the access to these resources now is to actually optimize the resources as best as possible. And for me, that's an easy and obvious answer, but a difficult to implement answer in that. And this is just simply about using different technologies to come through. So as an example, we need to run a conveyor belt in an agriculture environment. You may need to run tractors. You may need to run production, processing elements. How do we bring renewable energy into this kind of space? If you look at it from a water context, there's a lot of consumption of water. We know agriculture is one of the highest demands from a water perspective on any community. How do we make sure that that's sustainable? So for these kind of things, there's technologies too. For example, reuse the water. And this is to have systems where you can have treatment solutions on site as opposed to being reliant on municipal treatment plants, etc., which then talks about, again, here the connection of moving water, there's energy to move it. So you can see if we have this mixture of centralized and decentralized, there's an opportunity to optimize our systems. Then you can use technologies in other ways to also manage those systems to make sure we can monitor them effectively. So something like you might have a field that you're irrigating, you're drawing water from a source, but across that path, across that system that you might have, are there water losses that are taking place? How do we then use technologies to monitor that and making sure that we sustain our systems? And by keeping this upkeep, then we'll create a whole lot of optimization again and creating efficient systems so that, you know, we make every drop count in real terms.
Yeah, this is very, very beneficial on the ground with working with rural communities, thinking by that system. As nonprofit, what we do, as you said, in many cases, we start by a borehole, then solar powered water treatment unit, and then we can do irrigation system. And here we say that we have a self-sufficient community, but one of the challenges that we face after the production, because at the end, if they have 2 acres, 3 acres, 4 acres, they don't have the mass production required in order to compete in the market selling their crops. And this is one of the challenges that we face working with rural communities. As a nonprofit, we don't have the resources to go further. We don't have the resources to go further after they successfully have crops, but they selling these crops with the for-profit sector, there's a lot of challenges because commercially the traders, they take these crops for very few and there's no fair trade in many cases. So at the end, the self-sufficiency will not happen in the long term, maybe in the short term, but it's very in danger in the long term. How you see we can work to solve that?
Yeah, and no, absolutely. And, you know, I've also worked with quite a few NGOs as part of my CSR initiative, and I feel the pain that you talk about, those challenges are absolutely real. And I will go back to Corinne's kind of response about the collaboration. But if I can take that the formalization of those collaborations are also very key. So maybe I'll just put it in from our context. How do we see those relationship building? So we look at our CSR initiatives as a long-term sustainable drive. And I think this has to happen more and more often from a private sector and working with the NGOs, at least if there's one element of two different stakeholders or two different objectives, but they can be unified with some commonality between these. And we bring them a bit closer together. So we again create a bit more accountability to our communities. And that partnership then works in ways of how do we then close those gaps? So for me, we work with different NGO partners. One may be on water, one may be on commercialization, and that type of element that might be there, and help those communities bridge those gaps that might exist. From the NGO side, your specialization is also so key, because a lot of times the private institutions may not even know how to close some of those gaps. They understand they have an impact on communities. They understand that they have responsibility, but they have a gap on how to tangibly on the ground help those communities adjust to what's happening around the world. So your specialization is key for us in that perspective. And I've seen that happen with us. Things like opening up channels. So as an example, in South Africa, sometimes access to municipal lines is an example for water. To speed up the process to get that access. As a private entity, we don't have the expertise, the time, or the focus to get it, but the NGO then facilitates that and accelerates the development of that, and automatically then brings, in this case, the municipalities or the government entities to play a part. And already by that sheer conversation that ends up happening, it almost, through collaboration and through an organic manner of bringing people together, and the collaboration take place, and the formalization of those relationships takes place and crystallizes, and then the communities do see some benefit out of it. And again, my point behind this would be that, again, my pace is the bigger challenge for me. I think we need to really work a lot faster to bridge those gaps. Otherwise, you're going to put a lot more stress on our communities that's there.
Totally agree. Thank you, Chetan, very much.
Welcome anytime. Great questions.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, I think we can transition to some of the questions from the audience, which we have several coming through. So let's start, and these will be open to any of you, so feel free just to jump in and respond with anything here, and we'll see where they take us. So let's start with, we have one question about examples of complex systems thinking at different levels, and if there are any examples of successful interventions related to these integrated approaches that perhaps any of you would like to talk about or share.
I can talk about the intervention. So yes, so the successful intervention, one of the intervention that I love to talk about, as I mentioned earlier, working with Northern Kenya. Northern Kenya in a place called Horn of Africa, where there is a drought of Horn of Africa. There is no underground water. You can just find water more than 300 meters to 400 meters. The water is very little and very salty. So the cost of getting and doing filtration and desalination of this water is very expensive. On the other hand, they depend on the rain, and the rain here, they have two rain seasons, short one and long one. And because of the climate change, the two rain seasons are becoming shorter. The quantity of water is becoming less and less. And in many years, they just have one rain season. So this is a quite example of the climate challenges that these communities are facing. But when we talk about these communities and when we discuss that with them, we found a traditional solution that they do, which is a water pan. This is like a big reservoir in the ground in the way of the rain, and that collect and store water throughout the year, even if they don't have one of the two rainy seasons. So and here we can say that we adopted the Nexus thinking. So the first step, we did that water pan, which is pretty much more cost efficient than doing more technological solution. It contains a lot of civil work in order to have that with the right design in the right place. But at the end, we had a big reservoir as big as 10,000 cubic meters. And when the rain comes, it was filled with water that can be sustainable all around the year, taking into consideration the evaporation and the absorption of the land. The second step after that was cleaning that water. So this water is available, but it's not clean. And the communities are not well technologically educated, so that we introduced the ceramic water filters. These ceramic water filters are sustainable, cost-efficient filters made from natural resources, where it can last for 2 to 3 years and can kill all the bacteria, contamination, viruses inside the water. So that was the second step, having the sustainable water and cleaning them. The third step here was agriculture. There is no agriculture at all in northern Kenya because the water is it's less than what they need for drinking, and in many cases they go and migrate in other places. So we implemented a solar powered drip irrigation system on that water pan, and we make a social group from that community for a 5 acres piece of land where all of them are working together. So by putting all of the three together, we somehow figured out a system that is customized to their needs in order to be self-sufficient in the future. So this is one of the interventions that we always love to talk about, because this is not the traditional intervention that we face in all of our projects across Africa.
I'll go ahead and answer this as well, actually. I think I can think of a number of examples of this. One example that I can give is in the Philippines, where it was a community-led initiative where people from a community, an informal settlement, went about a process of purchasing the land and then making community upgrades. And I think that in order for that to happen, there had to be this creative coalition of various actors with various expertises that came in and out of the process at different times. But one important part of this was an NGO that consisted of a team of students, actually, student architects, engineers, or recently graduated. And I think that those teams worked really well with the community leaders who were making that project happen. But they also had to work across, government, NGOs, and I think that is one way of making that happen. I'm also thinking about something, local within Canada. I sit on the mayor's climate committee, and on that committee there are some of us from academia, there's engineers, there's town planners, there's somebody from the fire emergency services. And I think in order to truly prepare for climate action, you have to have those multidisciplinary teams that are contributing to their communities through community service and volunteering and whatnot. So I think that within a community or within a municipality, you can bring those actors together and just have meetings to discuss various issues. And when something comes up, then you've established those relationships and you're better able to tackle a problem together. And there's also communities of practice where various professionals can meet, every 2 months to discuss whatever the topic is. And then those relationships start to get formed, and then I think you're better positioned to perhaps work collaboratively in the future. But there are good examples of it. And I think that there are a lot of really good community-led examples that show how this big spider web of integration and integrated decision making can occur.
I could also probably give a couple of examples of this from our end. On creating these decentralized systems, and this I'm going to give this first example in a small context to just show that there's some simple things that we can do to help move the needle forward. This through our Watermark program, which is our CSR arm and our initiative. We work with the schools, an orange farm recently with an agripreneur who teaches other young students or anyone interested in agriculture to kind of increase their agricultural knowledge and train them in that space. And we work with these communities to help us put in some simple systems around water harvesting systems and irrigation systems that are efficient and that supports their food nutrition programs, as an example, in the school environment. And this takes care of a small gap, as an example, for the schools and the children that need to have the food security that's there. But these are simple interventions that are there and taking people away from the reliance of existing systems, because we know a lot of the existing systems are under pressure. We know certain communities under water cuts, etc. And these kind of things can assist and close some of those gaps. So something like this is not very complex and not very expensive either. And we can then create mini ecosystems within these communities. On a broader level, we've also worked with, if you may know that Zalem's a sponsor of they're a global sponsor of Stockholm Water Institute, and they run a Stockholm Junior Water Prize globally. In Africa, this year, we worked with many communities across Africa to drive the competition. We felt this was a highly important initiative to actually focus on because it actually stimulates, first of all, passion in the environment around water and water being a key resource, and then creating more innovation in that space, more people entering the water sector as an example, and then playing a more critical role. And for us, this means on a couple of levels, things like on developing the right type of technologies, but also in the other spaces like policy making or running our communities, municipalities a lot better in engineering spaces, etc. And from all of this, an interesting element that born out of this is that some of the NGOs that we're working with, Zalem is a private entity, and the government department or the water departments, water authorities, etc., came forward and started understanding their role a bit more in these kind of environments. And we created bonds between these and started looking at how do we look at communities and then provide solutions. And when sometimes they hear the technologies that are available, they go, it's an aha moment. And they say, okay, this is something that we can adopt. And then from our end, we look at how do we facilitate this. So again, we're not funders on our end, we are a commercial entity, but then we look at working with funders that are out there. There are World Banks, Africa Development Bank, there are private entity funders available. And then how do we connect the dots to ensure that we can create a sustainable community? So we're seeing these moves being made tangibly, and hopefully, again, we can accelerate these a lot more.
Thank you. Those responses were really interesting and thought-provoking. It's exciting to see that there are real examples at different levels, and these examples that can be adapted and perhaps implemented in other places globally. So we're going to ask one final question before we do a brief closeout. And this is a question that we try to close with in most of our panel discussions, but not always. And I'm particularly excited to hear the response from all of you on this one. So my very simple question to all three of you is, what gives you hope within the WEF Nexus? And I would invite any of you to respond to that.
I'll go ahead. I think that regular everyday people in communities who feel passionate about making their communities better and leaving their communities better, they give me hope. They give me great hope. Young people who are passionate about making the planet better and are open, I think, less territorial of their own space and more willing to collaborate, they give me hope. I think that there is this need to become a bit more humble, I think, in our professional in our professions, and be more open to collaborate. And the individuals that do that gives me hope. So those three things, and I'll leave it there.
So I can answer as well. I know my answer could be somehow romantic, but what gave us hope at the end is the impact. the impact we see. So, and that impact comes by collaborating with other organizations. But at the end, when you see at the last level, when you see how that water intervention, how that agriculture intervention, how by thinking from the Nexus point of view, with your limited resources, you can make a successful, long-lasting intervention to a community in very far from where you are. This gives us hope. And what gives us hope much more when the community, and for example, that the community, I talk about a lot about Northern Kenya, but 1 year after we implemented that project, I found on my WhatsApp, one of the people in the rural community, they sent me a video of them with the crops now green and they are happily dancing and chanting. And I wasn't expect that. I wasn't. So this at the end of the day, no matter what is the scale, whether it's a small project, medium project, with our limited resources, but this is at the end what makes us want to do this further and further.
Great stuff. From my perspective, I have a couple of things on this one as well. I think one of the things is that as a species, as human beings, we're quite a resilient kind of species. We respond and adapt quite quickly. We just have to look back on our current state, on how we managed through COVID, etc. We adapted. We make the necessary adjustments quite quickly in those kind of spheres. So I think in the same way, we will make the adjustments in dealing with the situation at the moment around the water, energy, food nexus that we have. And for this one, I'm going to put on my marketing hat and just see how the modern consumer is actually consuming brands. There's a shift that's taking place. Previously, there was an identity to a brand. I built into a brand purely because I like the brand for what products it might have, etc. But the modern consumers are holding the power now, and a lot of them are about what the brand stands for, the values and those kind of things. Therefore, when you see a brand that's acting irresponsibly, as an example, polluting water as an example, you see the retaliation that takes from the consumer space is amazing, and that power that they actually have to shift perceptions is really amazing. So we will see the modern consumers dictating on how communities will actually move forward. So private entities will be accountable to their consumers, and that will also change things. NGOs and the people that they're serving will be held accountable by the people that they are serving. And in this way, we will see some shifts taking place. And we're already seeing some of these green shoots as we're building towards the communities that we work with. For me, I can personally say tangibly, I mean, I've only worked in the CSR space in a commercial entity over the last year and a half at Xylem. And while working with this community, it is phenomenal to see how many people are willing to raise their hand and contribute and make a difference if they're just given a little bit of direction on how they need to, what steps they need to take.
Thank you. This has been a great panel there, and I have a lot of takeaways. I've jotted down a few notes that I'll just bring back to the forefront of our minds before we end the conversation today. So overall, I mean, a few statements that really just stood out to me are that this WEF Nexus thinking, it sounds sort of academic and perhaps a little complicated if you're just emerged coming into this space, but really it's not rocket science. It's actually quite logical. And you know, we just need to transition a lot of these conversations and commitments and talk into action around collaborative and integrated systems approaches. And there's which they are complicated and complex, but that shouldn't kind of scare us from approaching them, because that's, as Chetan was saying, that is how the human species has operated for millennia, at least is in this adaptable way. So other key things I want to just bring up before we close out are the need to accelerate the climate finance to enable these transitions, and that the current decision making doesn't reflect, is not reflected in actions and in the amount of funding in particular that's being transferred, particularly from the global north to the global south. We also need to think critically about accelerating action and the pace in which we are acting. So, you know, our resource demand is ever increasing, and the way in which we engage with resources is is also not changing for the better at the moment. So we need to shift the way we engage with resources and think about this complexity of resource demand, of climate change, of urbanization, of social unrest, and the interconnection of all of these issues that kind of manifest in this WEF nexus. It's also important to remember that the WEF nexus approaches are more efficient. They waste fewer resources. So they're logical, just smart business decisions to make or smart strategies to employ. Overall, the need for collaboration over competition, especially with organizations working for the same ultimate goal, definitely is paramount. And we need to create incentives for communities. This is something Mohanad talked about a lot, which was really interesting. And if we had more time, definitely would have liked to dive into this more. But balancing the immediate needs of communities with perhaps these more longer term initiatives that address the root causes of these issues, and how can, are they mutually exclusive? Are there ways to have both of those at the same time? And I think there certainly are. So that's a topic for next time, perhaps. Good community-led examples exist for trust building, for integrated knowledge sharing, integrated decision-making. These interdisciplinary teams and local knowledge sharing all exist, and they help to shift the power dynamics at play between the implementation of these strategies when there are such sort of deeply rooted and historical dynamics at play. And overall, this nexus approach really requires a reevaluation of the roles of NGO, of the industry, of governments across private, public, third sectors, that we really need to think about how we can set the scene for this transition, and all of us have a role. So I really hope this conversation today is a starting point for collaboration, even between the people on this call. So I am just really excited to see where we go from here. And there's a lot of conversations that I'm excited to follow up on. And I want to thank all of you for participating, and certainly all of our listeners for joining us today. We have some great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but please do follow along with the W12 Plus programs and all of the organizations that are represented here today. We have monthly newsletters that go out, and you'll certainly see the recording of this shared widely within those, and hopefully programs that maybe come out of ideas that were generated today. So stay in touch, and thank you all for a great session today.